Hello, everyone. Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Thursday, the 22nd of December, 2022. Click on the subscribe button to subscribe to future episodes, and also that notification bell in the far upper right. If you click on that, it will notify you when the episodes are released, and also it's going to ensure that the FBI never snoops on any of your internet activity. Okay, our topic today is Charles Dickens and the American Civil War. So let me pull up my notes and get started on that. In this season, I appreciate how 31-year-old Charles Dickens uplifted Christmas to a more prominent holiday with the release of A Christmas Carol in 1843. Some later critics had also characterized it as the fifth gospel. Nonetheless, he has Scrooge's nephew, Fred, say early in the novel, quote, "I have always thought of Christmastime as the only time of year when people seem, by one consent, to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of others below them as if they were really fellow passengers to the grave, and not merely another race of creatures bound on other journeys," close quote. Despite the transformative impact of A Christmas Carol, his publisher rejected the book. Dickens had to pay for the publication cost himself before knowing how many copies the readers might buy. But that's another story, and a good one. During the Civil War, Dickens was in his 50s and managed a literary journal titled All Year Round. In its day, the magazine was more prestigious than even the London Times. Eventually, it had 25 articles about the American Civil War, which Dickens meticulously edited. During the first of the war's 4 years, they were pro-North, but were pro-South thereafter. He rejected as pretext the Northern claim that the war was over slavery. He had visited America for 3 months, 2 years before he wrote A Christmas Carol. He spent most of his time in the North. Although he went as far west as St. Louis, he never went farther south than Richmond. His impressions of America were mostly unfavorable, partly because he was incensed by rampant copyright evasion, which deprived him of royalties. Most of the money he earned during his tour came from speaking engagements. Regarding slavery, Dickens wrote, quote, "Any reasonable creature may know, if willing, that the North hates the Negro. And until it was convenient to make a pretense that sympathy with him," meaning the Negro, "was a cause of the American Civil War, it also hated the abolitionists and derided them uphill and down dale," close quote. No doubt that opinion was partly informed by his 1842 American visit. His first novel after returning to England from that trip, Martin Chuzzlewit, criticizes American slavery, but also observes that Blacks were decidedly unwelcome in the North. Similarly, when French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville toured both the northern and southern sections of America 10 years earlier, he found racial prejudice to be, quote, "stronger in the states where they have abolished slavery than where it still existed, and nowhere stronger than in those states where servitude has never been known." When politicians were debating the settlement policies for the federal territories acquired after the Mexican War in 1848, Abraham Lincoln said publicly in a public address in 1854, quote, "The whole nation is interested that the best use shall be made of these territories. We want them for the homes of free white people, close quote. 4 years later, in 1858, he said, quote, I am not now, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social or political equality of the white and black races. There is a physical difference between us, which will forever forbid the two races living together on social or political equality, close quote. There must be a position, he continues, the quote continues, there must be a position of superior and inferior, and I am in favor of assigning the superior position to the white man, close quote. Finally, only about a month before the Civil War started in April 1861, he said in his first presidential inaugural address, I have no purpose, quote, I have no purpose directly or indirectly to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so, close quote. More significantly, despite notwithstanding those quotes or setting them aside, more significantly, the validity of Dickinson's conclusion that emancipation was merely a convenient pretext for Northerners to fabricate a fake noble reason for devastating the Southern states is underscored by what the Yankees did after the war started, as opposed to what they said before it. Always watch what people do and put more emphasis on what they do as opposed to what they say. We learned that in kindergarten. Okay. Before the war, the Northerners claimed they merely wanted to block the spread of slavery to the federal territories, and specifically it was the Republican Party. In truth, they wanted to prevent the movement of blacks, free or slave, into those territories. Consider the evidence of the 22 states that joined the Union after the last properly admitted slave state of Texas in 1845. All except two had only about 1% of their populations composed of blacks. The two exceptions were the border states of Oklahoma and West Virginia. As late as 1910, almost a half a century after the war started, 90% of blacks still lived in the South. Thus, Northerners gained one of their chief war aims after the war, which was to quarantine blacks in the South. You don't hear many academic historians talking about that, but it was one of their objectives. In fact, one of them wrote a book, I can't remember the name right now, called The Scorpion Sting, in which he said it was really a deliberate policy to end slavery. But the results show that it was really a deliberate policy to quarantine blacks in the South. That's why 90% of the blacks, 50 years after the war started, still lived in the South. The Northerners only modestly relaxed that quarantine policy when the armaments needed in Europe during World War I caused a labor shortage in the northern states. Now, keep in mind, World War I started in 1914, and there was almost an immediate demand for war armaments to be produced in the United States and shipped to the belligerents in Europe, including both sides. So the impact was really not 1918, which was when, or 1917, which was when America actually entered the war. The impact on the labor shortage in the North came before that. Okay. Let me share something else with you here. Hold on a second. All right. This is my book, Trading with the Enemy. It's really one of the best books that I've done because it looks at a part of the war in which there are no heroes. And it settles some myths about how the war was conducted. For example, 2/3 twice as much cotton went through the battle lines to the New England mills as went through the maritime blockade to Europe. We think of Rhett Butler as being, people like Rhett Butler as being the kind of guys that exported cotton out of the South during the war. But in truth, twice as much of it went to the northern states across battle lines. And the Northerners wanted it so badly they'd pay sometimes with gold. They'd even trade weapons for cotton. This is scandalous, and most academics don't spend any time discussing this. They'll discuss something about slavery to the most minute detail, but the trading with the enemy they do not discuss. It's say sweep it under the carpet. But if you really want to know what's going on there, I recommend you get that. There's even a case to be made for one of the Rhode Island senators engaged in trading weapons for cotton, and the senator happened to be also a major stockholder in some of the biggest cotton mills in New England. Okay, so let me stop that sharing there. That's what I've got to say today. It's only a few days before Christmas, but like I say, at this time of year, I think of things that connect to Christmas, and it's important to realize that Dickens saw through the hypocrisy, and not the hypocrisy, but the falsehood of the Northern arguments that they were going to war to free the slaves, or the falsehood that is common among the public today, that the Northerners had a favorable opinion of blacks. Whereas in truth, in that era, the whole country was racist. And in truth, one of the chief aims of the Northerners during the war and before the war was to quarantine blacks in the South, whether they were free or slave. That's an important message to get. And I want to thank you for watching and hopefully picking up that message. See you next time.